on his presentation.
5548.
5540. Let's have a hand to all our lucky winners here.
And putting this together, and of course everything goes on with David's side. I just ran out of time to get a haircut. So, Buck, sit. Okay, just do, stand. Good boy. Always listens. So here we go, everybody. This is awesome to be here, and it is super exciting to talk about this trip. And what it is Baffin Island. Okay, so Baffin Island is a massive island. I'm probably wrong on these stats because I didn't Google them, but I think it's like 4 times the size of Great Britain with like a population of 10,000 or something like that. It's absolutely laden with gigantic, majestic, snow-spattered mountains, and it's just a totally legendary place. It has, obviously not First Nations, but Inuit history and history of the Vikings. Baffin Island was, a lot of people think it was Leif Erikson's Helluland, and a place that the Norse sailed to, and possibly even stayed for a time. So a really interesting kind of place with this mystique, and part of it is a place called Akshayuk Pass, and it's actually a national park, part of Auyuittuq National Park, which means the land that never melts. And so this is just this epic preserved area that's got the world's largest vertical face and all kinds of stuff in it, and sort of just a bucket list trip for me. But of course I couldn't just do the national park. I had to do a much longer route and use that corridor as sort of the main highlight of my trip. Here you can see where Baffin Island is, where Akshayuk Pass is. That's the Cumberland Peninsula. And basically my route would follow the shore of Baffin Island, starting in a small Inuit hamlet called Auyuittuq, and it would go 80 kilometers along the shore, and then about 80 kilometers through Akshayuk Pass, and then another 30 kilometers to Pengnirtung, where it would finish. So this was just, like I said, a bucket list trip. I wanted to extend it. I wanted to witness Baffin Island, and so I just decided to go for it. However, because part of it is in a national park, you can't get a permit to carry a gun. Well, you can, but not if you also have to buy a film permit. I did film much of this trip, so I couldn't get one. And the first 80 kilometers of my trip, I was walking along the coast right at the time that female polar bears are coming out of hibernation with their cubs, and they are hungry, and they're restless, and they're protective of their cubs. And I remember talking to one of the locals in Auyuittuq, and he said, "What a stupid kabluna thing to do." That means white man. "I can't believe you're coming out here without a gun. Like, what is the matter with you?" He thought it was completely nuts. And I had a gun on my way to the airport, where my 7 months pregnant wife was driving me to the airport. I had my gun packed. I thought I was going to be allowed to take it. All of a sudden, I get a call from the parks guy. He's like, "Hi, Jim. I'm sorry about the mix-up. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to bring a firearm on the trip. I really do apologize to you." And my wife's just like, oh my God, like she just was totally full of fear and anxiety. But I did bring some other things to protect against polar bear. Here's my flight. This is a First Air. That's the airline of the North. They provide flights in up to a lot of the northern communities, and it's a long flight from Ottawa up to Baffin Island. And it wasn't long before I started passing some really kind of rugged scenery. We actually stopped once we got into turboprop. These little communities, they just have these tiny little gravel runways, and a lot of them are just encircled with mountains, and it can be really kind of scary to land. So we stopped in Pang, and some people got off there, and then we flew over Baffin Island to Auyuittuq, and then I would walk back to Pang. Epic freaking, look at this, man. Like, it was just worth it for the flight. This is the penny ice cap here. The penny ice cap is what Auyuittuq National Park is named for, the land that never melts, because the penny ice cap is the most southerly remnant of the Laurentide ice sheet that covered all of eastern North America. So literally it was almost like I was traveling back to the last ice age to be walking basically beside this massive penny ice cap, which was pretty interesting. I actually bumped into some other adventurers on the plane. So there's Kevin Valley leading a trip, and another group as well. And when we talked to the guy at the park office and said, well, do you usually see, is there a lot of groups like this coming through at the same time? He's like, no, like this is the first time this has ever happened. It's not very commonly done. But they were actually starting at the trailhead. I was walking 80 kilometers to the pass. So they were getting a skidoo shuttle all the way there. And they said, Jim, you know, you want to jump on our skidoo shuttle and we'll give you a lift to the trailhead? And I said, no thanks, I'll walk. And they thought that was pretty funny, and I think they might have thought I was a little crazy too. Anyways, so one of the cool things, here's an example of just this, basically gravel, snow and ice runway, the turboprops. They can't land a jet in there. And Auyuittuq is a community, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in the Inuktitut proper pronunciation, but it is a very interesting community. We're talking about, something that's way off the road system. It was some sort of Air Force base at one time, and there was, or something to do with a dew line site, and there was literally no one there. So nobody really moved into that area until about the 50s. Before that, the people were living basically out on the land, living nomadically. So it's been settled for a very short period of time, and very traditional activities. These were just, random, I don't know if they were stray or what, but they just kind of ran around town and followed me everywhere with Buck. Like, weren't sure if they wanted to fight him or hump him or what. But there's just these kind of random sled dogs. This is a freighter canoe. They're still very much used in the north, these wood canvas freighter canoes. It was right at the time of polar bear. This was a common sighting. I think there was about 3 of these. Each community will get, per community, they'll get a certain amount of tags, depending on what the populations might be, and then they choose who gets to go out and harvest the polar bear. All the meat is eaten. A couple of the people in the group were from Australia, and they were just pretty much traumatized by that. But it's definitely an interesting sight to see. And so, anyways, I had a trail that I could follow, which is good because this area actually doesn't really have hard packed snow. And why that was a concern to me is because. First of all, when it's light and fluffy snow, it's a heck of a lot harder hauling. Like what Dave was talking about up in Tamagami areas in Ontario, where we have that deep snow. In the Arctic, the reason that people can travel these huge distances, or in Antarctic expeditions, by the way, is because that snow is so hard packed. It's not quite like ice, but it's similar. And what packs the snow like that is actually the wind. So I did have this broken trail, but the other thing that's so key is that hard-packed snow is so important to use for building igloos, and that's why, before they moved to that community because of other influences, the Inuit in Auyuittuq, which means big island, it's an island just adjacent to Baffin, they didn't live there really in winter because there was no good snow to build igloos. And you'll learn a little bit longer in the presentation how key that could be just to build a small little square shelter, if that's your only hope, or to build a snow block wall that can block the wind, because it's very challenging to set a tent up in 80, 100 kilometer an hour winds, to say the least. So I started off with just like absolutely epic weather. It was almost perfect. There were glaciers like this. These glaciers have broken off the Greenland Ice Sheet and have floated down and are just locked into the ice here. They just have that amazing sort of, iridescent blue color as well. And this is what I use for polar bear protection. So this is a polar bear tripwire fence. If you see at the bottom here, this is actually a 12 gauge blank. And the 12 gauge blank is connected to a little kind of, I guess you could call it a trigger or a pin, and connected to these lines here. And so that goes in a huge square around your tent. I basically just fasten them to, to stakes, and I'd stick them in all around and set it up every night. So if something comes into the perimeter, boom, one fires off, maybe two fire off, and hopefully that scares the bejesus out of the polar bear, and it decides not to eat you. So that's the idea. It made me feel a lot safer. There's another shot of it. You can see how I kind of had that rigged up every day. So that was part of my sort of daily routine, doing that. And I'll give you a little run through on the polar bear fence here. We're gonna set up my bear alarm fence now. I'll take you. Is this as loud as this thing gets?
Okay, so here's the bear.
Oh, there's subtitles.
The shotgun shell, a blank 12-gauge shell, and it's connected to this tripwire, which runs all the way over.
If a bear walks past this tripwire, boom, at least one of the 12-gauge blanks go off. Maybe two, maybe three. And now what I do is I put in a little safety that just slides in there, and that way it won't go off. And then to make it live, I remove that thing. Well, it's time to pretty much time to climb in the tent and get ready for some sleep. It's so bright out, but it's actually later than you think. Yeah, so this was in early April, and so you're so far north. I'd actually crossed the Arctic Circle on this trip, so it's really starting to get light out. One thing about the Arctic, male polar bears never hibernate, and it's something we're not used to. Is usually you think, oh, winter camping, the bears are hibernating, but it's not really an issue there. Now, usually in the winter, the bears will be out at the sea ice edge, because that's where most of the food is. Sometimes they'll come inland to hunt seals at breathing holes and stuff like that. So basically, I kept traveling along the sea ice. I did see polar bear tracks here as well. They were fairly fresh too. They look like they're Buck's tracks there. Buck, you look like a polar bear. Buck, act a little lively. We're trying to entertain people here. So that kind of made me a little nervous, and then I always stop if I saw something in the distance. Good boy. I'd stop if I saw something in the distance, and one time I thought it was a polar bear, and I brought out my video camera and I zoomed way in on it, and I saw, it's just an abandoned snowmobile. The route actually is a traditional Inuit travel route through Akshayuk Pass, and it was actually the guy that discovered it was named after him. He's a legendary dude, even amongst legends. Every day I travel along, still just perfect weather. Like literally, I think it was no wind, -4 degrees. It was hard to actually keep enough water in me. I brought 2 liter and a half Nalgene bottles, and I think another 1 liter, and I was drinking all that, no problem, and getting really thirsty. And some places where the Buck stay, that's the raffle. In some places where the snow was low, you get salty water, which was just disgusting, and you couldn't drink it. So the tent I brought here is a Snow Trekker minimalist tent, and I actually would set it up a little more squat, okay, because Snow Trekkers, they have this A-frame pole system, and I would actually fold the bottom pole connection underneath and wrap it down, and I actually ran into some really interesting weather on my Ungava trip, and I had to set up like that the first time I ever set it up in like a wilderness Arctic situation, and that's how I set it up, and it worked so well. I said, okay, this is perfect. So I mean, it's great to know you have that option if you're stuck in high ripping winds in the Arctic, which I don't recommend, but it's all part of the good stuff, the fun of it all. And you can see how I stake my tent out. So I use snow stakes. So I use the big flat metal stakes with holes in the middle, and what I do is I just run my guy line through a hole in the middle of that stake, and basically with a shovel cut a T in the snow. It's really hard packed. Of course, here some places it wasn't, so I have to make sure I really got that down deep, and then you push all the snow back in, and it firms up once that little bit of moisture has been exposed to the air, and it firms up, and that stake is in there really, really hard. So a really effective way of staking down your tent. Of course, I had Buck helping to pull. Here's what I did when I didn't have enough. You can see how shallow the snow is there. So the other thing I brought as backup is ice screws, which I never ended up using. But this is kind of the snow stake, and I just kind of I sort of improvised that day. You see here we got Buck, and that's a awesome companion. He has the fur. I'm going to be perfectly honest. He's not a lead dog. He's not. There's a lot of calling Buck and bribing with treats. Which perfectly honestly ran out on like day 3, and then I was just faking like rustling a Ziploc bag to try to get him to come. But after we did the Angaba trip, as soon as we got to Auyuittuq, he knew what was going on. He's like, yes, here we go. It's time for my 8-hour-a-day walk. And he was like pretty fired up and excited to be out there trekking. He actually found a seal den and was like sniffing at it violently, like the most exciting thing he's ever seen. So that's the reason why I can travel the way I do. A lot of people, when you see them doing these Antarctic expeditions or Arctic treks, they'll bring sort of like mountaineering style tents, the lighter weight ones. Well, most dog sledders and the people of the north, they almost always travel with canvas tents, and they'll use a double burner Coleman stove in them for heat. And so some people that are kind of Arctic trekkers are like, why the heck are you bringing a canvas tent? And I said, well, because I have a dog, I can kind of travel in between those two styles of winter travel. And because of that, I can have a tent that I can heat with the stove. I can bring extra naphtha gas. I can dry my clothes out. And, I'm freaking up there alone, you know what I mean? And having that place that I can get a warm is a huge survival advantage when I'm out there for sure. This is a little video so you can just see how these pulks were that we pulled, me and Buck. So Buck would just kind of trek along beside me, sometimes in front of me, and when I tried to pass him, he'd cut me off because he didn't want to walk any faster. And there's that snowmobile in the distance that's just abandoned, that I thought was something, when you stare at something long enough, you start to think that it's alive, and that it's moving or something, and anyways, false alarm. You can see how dramatic this is getting, like look at how incredible this is. There's me getting ready, just passing those big cliffs. I was already in awe, it was so cool. It was actually, honestly, almost too hot, and I started thinking, wow, if it stays like this, it's almost going to be like too easy. It's always a bad thing when that kind of thought enters my mind, never a good thing, because somehow Mother Nature's like, oh yeah, you asked for it, pump ginger, and so So finally I'm getting to Akshayuk Pass. This is still where this is North Pangirtung Fjord, and it's starting to, as I'm nearing Akshayuk Pass, it's already getting really dramatic, like very beautiful scenery I'm already witnessing, and this time of year you're really starting to get that kind of, I saw Northern Lights once, and then by the end of the trip I was going to bed and it was still light, and waking up there's not much darkness already at this time of year, which is cool. And here we are at the beginning of the pass on a perfect day. They have these emergency shelters, these really squat shelters that they put, I think every 40 kilometers or so through the pass. And they're supposed to be for emergency only. As you can see, it was an emergency here. But at the same time, some of the park guys were like, listen, just stay in the shelters, bud, when you need to, right? So I showed up and I said, you know what, I'm going to stay in the shelter. Well, I'm pretty happy that I did, because the weather turned incredibly unstable. I was actually able to use my Coleman double burner to heat it a little bit, but I spent 2 days held up in this with just absolutely ripping wind. I started trying to travel on the first day. I got out there and I probably made it about 300 meters, and it was actually, the snow was actually almost wet, and it was almost turning into slush on my bags. Incredibly hard wind, to the point where, okay, why am I not moving faster right now? Like, I'm walking as hard as I can and you're going like this. You know what I mean? And I just realized this is crazy. I'm not going to set the tent up in this. I turned back and I held up in the shelter again. And the day after that, it was miserable. But this is my heat source. You guys probably all know this, that you got to take starter's paste when you're out there. I mean, I guess you can use little pine needles or birch bark to put on your element and light. That's not really an option out there. So a little starter's paste, you put it on the element of your stove, you light the starter's paste, and then you light the stove. So pretty key thing to use right there. And this is what provided me with warmth. I'd light it after it was really cold. I'd light that, and it would just be like, oh, I'm gonna live. Yes, just feel that coming in. And so here I explain a little bit about when I'm in the shelter. The day I got there, before the weather got bad, I kind of explained a little bit about what I do with water and about some of the challenges of having salty water.
Today again, my water was salty, even though I tried my hardest not to take snow that was close to the surface of the sea ice. Tonight, just to make sure I've gone a distance inland, and I'm going to cut some blocks of hard-packed snow. That way, I hopefully won't have to deal with salty water again and waste my stove gas. You don't want to eat too much snow. Drop your core temperature too fast. Really disappointing to want to put miles on, and every time you're so thirsty, you're drinking this salty water, just black, it's just nasty. And then as soon as fresh water touches your lips, you just have a whole new appreciation for the thirst-quenching deliciousness of water.
It wasn't really an option for me to chisel through the ice, obviously not on the sea ice, and obviously where the ice is, 7 feet thick, so it's melting snow is definitely the way to go. So again, having some naphtha gas in the stove, really good. Back in the day, they used to actually melt snow with the light of a quidlet, which is just a tiny little flame from seal oil. So this is a few steps above that for sure. Yeah, so this is me, this is the picture I led off with. This is me heading off into the pass, finally, when the weather broke. And you can see I dealt with some kind of glare ice as well. Yeah, it was challenging at times, having those ice spikes on my feet. I don't know if you can see them there, but having these ice spikes is so important. The only thing I found was that I got so used to having them on that when I take them off, it was dangerous, because I would think that I had that traction when I just really didn't at all. So anyways, yeah, so this is a glacial moraine here. This is obviously where a glacier was, probably blocking the entire pass, and has slowly retreated. So this is an area that is just basically, it's very fresh. It's sort of, the glaciers have just left, and of course the penny ice cap is still there. In fact, the lake, which is in the middle of this pass on the height of land, up until 1958 used to flow in both directions. But just from the glacier slowly melting over time, now it flows only in one. Again, I'm in awe. This isn't even the most beautiful part of the trip here, and I'm already starting to just see incredible weather. I was seeing incredible weather, incredible scenery, but things started to get really unstable. And it's like the weather was so perfect for so long. This whole trip was 18 days, so I think the first 6 days we're having almost perfect weather, and I started getting concerned. I'm like, this is gonna give some time. And so I was often traveling, looking at the skies, kind of, should I stop and make camp? Sometimes it was nearly a whiteout as I was traveling on like that. And so that kind of gave an extra level of fear to the entire thing. But I did have a perfect, an absolutely perfect conditions this day as I approached Mount Asgard. Now, a lot of these mountains are named after, like gods and things from Norse mythology. This is Asgard. I believe Asgard was some sort of a plain where gods used to meet and feast. And it's really distinguishable because it's just got that flat top. It's just cut right off. So this is kind of one of the most famous, landmarks in Akshayuk Pass. And here we have Buk again. Buk's decided that, hey, let's just make camp here. Where are you going? I think we're good. I think we're good here. But actually, this was pretty easy going for Buk too on this kind of snow. When it got really icy, and it was easy to pull my sledge, I would just take Buck off and pull both of them, because what would happen is his feet would get onto the ice, but the pulk or his sledge would be on the snow, and to try to get that traction to pull it off, he fell once. So I just decided I didn't want to see him get hurt, so I just take it. And there's Mount Asgard again, just like, look at it, just looks like some sort of, I don't know, fairy tale or something from another universe, just absolutely breathtaking. I was just in awe while I was approaching it here. I made camp, and then again, I couldn't travel for another full day. Now this looks like a beautiful day, but it was absolutely ripping winds. You can see how the wind's drifting. You can see how the tent is being pushed in by the wind there as well. And so, you know, basically what I do is I just stay in my tent and read a book while this is happening, and just don't take the risk to get out there and travel. Just wait it out. You know, in the north like this, it's not time that should dictate your pace of travel. It's safety and the weather. Well, unfortunately, I forgot my book, and all I had was this like Parks Canada map with literature on the back. So I read the Parks Canada literature like literally 15 times in a row, and so I was starting to get a little bit antsy. This is absolutely key thing to bring on a trip like this, a really, really good thermos. This one looks almost like a tank round. It's like super heavy duty, minus 40, and my tea or coffee would still be warm by the end of the day. For food, I brought a lot of freeze-dried food. This is Happy Yak, really tasty, and I've eaten a lot of different kinds of freeze-dried food before, but what I liked about this one was that I actually felt full still after. Like, I found a lot of other freeze-dried meals that I buy, you eat them and then they just don't seem to fill you up. Obviously a lot of people are you know, smarter than me and make their own dehydrated food. That's also a great option, but great way to take stuff that's light. I also, you know, for lunches, I tried to make lunches that were relatively easy. So everything I got, I just looked at, you know, what was the highest calorie. So I bring super high calorie energy bars, beef jerky, I brought some cheese, a stick of butter, and I just literally sit on top of my toboggan with my back to the wind and eat like that every day. And just try to fuel up basically as I was out there. And this is what I was saying is great about this tent is I kind of made a ridge line. I could hang my stuff up to dry a bit, because that's one of the big challenges when you're in the Arctic is sweating. And if you don't keep at least one dry pair of clothes, you can run into a lot of trouble. So I always made sure I had one pair that no matter what, I would keep dry for when I was sleeping. And then my other pair, if it was a little bit damp, I dried out as much as I could at night, and I would let it hang like this. And then before bed, I'd often just take it and put it into a clear plastic garbage bag and put that in my sleeping bag with me, and that way it wouldn't be frozen the next morning as I put it on, or as cold. So I was dealing with some dampness for sure, trying to avoid that dampness because it can become a real danger. But I was also, you know, traveling in some, you know, damp clothes as well. One of the things that is a great thing that I did that at first I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea, was I wore Ziploc bags over my socks, over my feet. And some people wear Gore-Tex socks. And the reason that's great is now your socks are going to get wet for sure when you do that, but your boot liner's not going to get wet. So, you know, you can keep your boot liners in your sleeping bag every night, but eventually the damper they get, the colder they get, and then they get too damp, and it's hard to dry when you're up there and you don't have a fire source really to dry those boot liners. So what I was able to do is just wear these big Ziploc bags over my feet, and then I would just dry my socks as best I could, and I would just leave my boots out in the night, and there was no moisture in it. So I could just pop them in the next day, and they weren't frozen solid, which was awesome. And also the Ziploc bags help prevent blistering as well on the back of your heel. So yeah, I wore those on both Mount Gava and this trip, and they're great. That's the tent there in the evening. After you can kind of see that ripping you know, snow blowing, and just, you know, the wind just ripping through this moraine here. And that's a day that you don't travel. So, you know, I got out of my tent every once in a while to take a few pictures and, you know, try not to freeze too much before I dove back in. This is a polar bear I found, just kidding. So the next day I decided, so I'm in this tent and I'm feeling pretty antsy now after reading this map for the 17th time. And so I decided, okay, you know what, it's probably fine today, I'm just gonna go for it, I'm gonna travel. Now today I had this height of land to travel, and it was probably a bad decision. I got out and I started basically breaking camp and hauling up this this really, really steep, I think it was a 350-foot incline on this hill, and the wind was just ripping like this. Now, it's challenging for Buck because if he tries to take a break, that sled is kind of pulling back, so it's hard to do that. So I was going back down the hill and getting Buck's and helping Buck up, and then I kind of pin his sledge there, and then I take mine and sort of leapfrog both of our sledges up this really steep incline. Well, by the time I got to the top of it, I was really sweating, and I was like, oh no, this is bad. Like, I just was working too hard. I was trying to get this part over with, and I wasn't thinking, and I was kind of soaked with sweat. And so basically after that, I experienced some of the most interesting winds I've ever experienced. Akshayuk Pass is a bit of a wind tunnel, because what happens is that winds basically, or air will fall off the top of the mountains and it will just be kind of directed into this pass. And so it's not uncommon for 160 km/h winds in the pass at all. So after being really cold, the winds picked up, and this is what happened.
I don't think I'm going to be able to make it another 13K against these winds today. Basically just going to try to dig out a space here for the tent. I just really hope that the wind doesn't change directions on me here. Rock has become very slippery. So now I've just got to get my tent up. In the Arctic, there are tricks like this. They take a lot of work, but you can use them and you can survive. The only thing is there's very little margin for error. If you can't build it and you can't get your tent up, you die. You don't just have a chilly night, it's game over. I've decided that I'm going to have my last hot chocolate tonight. What do you think? Do I deserve it? I think so.
Last hot chocolate. Man, did I ever deserve it. My whole parka was getting wet there, and I started getting really scared. I started thinking about my pregnant wife at home who's totally worried about me, and I looked around the land and I looked and I said, there's got to be something. Like, nature always will, not always, but most of the time there's something that you can use to save yourself if you think. A lot of the time you get in these situations and you kind of panic. It's like when you take the survival courses, they say the first thing you want to do is remain calm. It's like, that's also like the hardest thing, because as soon as I think I'm lost, I just start running around like an idiot. You got to actually stop and be like, okay, which way are we going there? So that's basically what I had to do. Okay, stop panicking. What can I find? Because all that snow underneath me was really fluffy despite the winds. And so what I actually found was a 12-foot high sand dune. Okay, so does that tell you how windy it is there? That there's a 12-foot high sand dune. And in the lee of this huge sand dune, there was a hard-packed snowdrift. Now, it's probably not the best idea to dig out a drift to camp, because then what happens? Your tent gets drifted over, right? But for one night, and when it's the only place where you can get hard-packed snow, this was probably, honestly, I probably would have died if I didn't find this, to be perfectly honest with you. That's kind of that little nestled it in right there, and then built a wall on one side, because the dune was only kind of partially blocking the wind, and there's still another wicked crosswind coming down off the mountains there. Buck didn't really seem to give a crap, actually. He was started kind of almost drifting over, and as I was building this wall, my foot kind of kicked him by accident, and he kind of broke his head up out of the snow and looked at me like, what? And so I'm like, oh my God, this is priceless. I got to film this. So, and then right after that is when my camera pretty much died, and I didn't get the whole setup there because it was too survival-y until my tent was set up, and then I put a new battery in. So that was a very, very interesting, probably the most harrowing moment of the trip. But now that I was over the height of land, it was all downhill. And I started heading down a river called the Weasel River, but going through these headwater lakes, and just the scenery again was just incredible. Here is Buck trying to navigate. This is, if you have ice cleats on, you can pull like a tow truck over this stuff. It's so easy to pull your sledges over this glare ice. The only problem is that once I get into the river and you have ice freezing here, and then the water level goes down and that ice bends over top of big boulders and you're walking, your sled just starts sliding out that way and it can get pretty sketchy. But this was a lake, so we weren't really running into those kind of issues there, but some incredibly thick, crystal clear, ice we were dealing with. And here's Buck. Okay, first of all, Buck is just scared of walking on glare ice, or he was scared of it. And here is a short video of Buck overcoming his fears. I never thought he would be able to do this, because he's kind of, I talked to his old owner and said he went through the ice once when he was little, so he had a bit of a phobia, and I was so impressed that he managed to get over it. It's a short little vid. Okay, it's Buck. There, does a little sprint at the end. Good work. Good work. Yeah, so, but then what was happening, like I said earlier, is when he'd be in those patches of snow and then ice, and then snow and then ice, he'd get up onto the patch of snow and his sledge would be on, and then he couldn't get the traction to pull the sledge off the snow. So after that, when it got really icy, I would just take Buck off and strap it to my own one, because I had the cleats on, and then I could just walk easily, and Buck was off the hook, so that was cool. So this is Mount Thor. Okay, this is the largest cliff in the freaking world. It was climbed by, the first time it was climbed was a group of Americans. I think it took them 34 days. Do you imagine hanging onto the edge of this thing for 34 days? Like, how do you, I can't even wrap my head around that. Anyways, it was very challenging because there's a lot of rotted rock, they call it, because of all the thawing and refreezing. Has anyone ever seen, I think it's The Spy Who Loved Me? It was a James Bond movie, and with Roger Moore. Anyways, whatever, it was shot here. So at the beginning, Roger Moore freaking skied off the top of Mount Thor for that big opening James Bond movie scene. He's being chased by guys in machine guns, and he flies off, and then you think he's gonna die, and then he opens this Union Jack parachute and he survives. So like a massively enormous expense in the 70s, they came up here and shot James Bond freaking skiing off at the top of this thing. So pretty interesting spot, and just incredible sight to behold as well. One of the other things that is weird about it is that it looked different from almost every angle. I'll show you some other shots. I can't really wrap my head around it. Yeah, here's just my campsite here. Basically standard sort of night camping. I'm about to head down into the Weasel River. That shot of Mount Thor, that was a zoom in, and I'm about to actually pass it, and things got a little interesting there, but we'll get to that. This is my pulks. This is Polar Supplies. It's basically just a super tough, plastic pulk. But why I love it is because it's almost like a custom hockey bag. He's a British guy, and I explained it as a custom hockey bag, and he's just like, what are you talking about? But yeah, it's basically like a hockey bag. So the amount of stuff you can fit in there was great. So I actually really like these much better than the ones I used on Gaba. And then here we're getting in, this is another pretty famous mountain. That's like a Cirque Glacier up there, going around this peak. That's Thor in the background. And one of the things I found really interesting about Dave's presentation is just talking about ice conditions, because that's all something that's, you can't ever learn too much about that. Not an issue here. I literally walked down a waterfall. Like an entire waterfall was frozen solid. I'm almost at the top of it now, and it just drops off. And literally I turned my pulks around backwards and tried to kind of lower them down in a controlled fall, more or less. But like the entire waterfall was just absolutely frozen solid, which would have been like a raging waterfall in the summer, just because it's so consistently cold there for so long. And so here's my approach to Mount Thor. I took a vertical shot because I was supposed to be doing an Explore magazine story on this trip, and I'm like, maybe they'll put me on the cover. I gotta get a vertical shot. This is gonna be awesome, and man, all the most prettiest sceneries from here down. So I can't wait for all these great pictures I'm gonna take. So I get this one, I say, okay, that's pretty good. And I think I set it up again to get a video. And I started walking away again, and then I hear smash. And I look around, and Buck's just got this sheepish little look on his face by the camera, and basically he just knocked the camera over and smashed it. I didn't have a backup lens. So anyways, I tried, it wasn't his fault, but I was just like, Baird, you know? So you're good, you're good. Problem with having a dog named Buck when you're taking him on trips like this, he's always like, why are you yelling? I'm like, no, I didn't say Buck, I said... So here we have Mount Thor. Luckily my video camera was still working here, and this is just a short little time lapse. See how it looks totally different from this perspective too? Isn't that weird? Let me go and get my camera. Oh, forgot my camera. Yeah, so that was just incredible. And then I'm kind of following, now I'm starting to use my iPhone, but the scenery is so incredible that the pictures are still half decent. I'm just following these kind of little creeks. You can see how barren it is. This isn't really a place to see wildlife because there's no plants that the smaller animals eat and the predators eat them. And at one time there were caribou in there, but I don't know if it's from human-caused pressures or also some serious floods and winds that came through there that basically blew away all the fertile soil. So there's very little wind. That's Buck looking regal AF in front of Mount Thor. Yeah, you can see again, just walking. This is where it's very challenging. No snow. Where do I build that snow block wall? I'm walking and it's beautiful, but I'm like, oh man, if this weather gets worse, like I'm looking around for kind of shelter. Of course, the group that in front of me, I talked to them once my trip was done, and they had like perfect weather the whole time, right? So that's how it goes. There's Thor again, from a different perspective. And me in a selfie. Here's another one of these shelters I stayed at after that last shot of that incredible wind. I was pretty happy to come up on one of these as the weather was turning worse and be able to get in there and not have to set up my tent. This is the part of the trip where I wish I brought ice skates. Honestly, if you're going up there, a lot of people, they go from Pang, they walk to Thor and back, consider bringing ice skates. I'm not even kidding you. It would have been so fun. Like, imagine a pond hockey game out here, like how epic that would be. And here is me crossing the Arctic Circle. Buck actually peed on this thing. I actually got it on film too. I was like, Buck, no! And I just kept going. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. So I crossed that Arctic Circle marker, which just seems like a lonely little cairn out here in the middle of nowhere. And this is a caribou antler that I found, which, very old one, because for whatever reason, they're not really there anymore. And yeah, just kind of, making my way through this kind of scenery. So here we get a great example of how the ice bends over boulders, right? So, the water levels here, when freeze-up comes in like November, and then, the water level goes down under the ice, and that water kind of bends and forms over top of the boulder. And that creates a kind of big hump of ice. So it's almost like a jump, some areas like that, and we had ones like that were very wide and pronounced, so I'd be trying to pull my pulse over that, and they'd be like, like this. So the ice was really, really easy to pull over, but when you reach things like this, it could get a little sketchy potentially at times, because nothing's ever easy. Yeah, so there's Buck, and again, just didn't even bother no point in keeping the toboggan on him at this point, so he kind of got to be free. And now I'm at the park boundary, and Parks Canada has this thing where they put these like red Muskoka chairs, and they're like, send us pictures of the chair. So I caught this thing, it was upside down out of the corner of my eye, so I went up and took a picture of this lonely Parks Canada chair. And I sent it to them, and they're like, we have never received a picture from here of one of these chairs. Wow. I was the only dude to go and do it. So there's me and Buck there. That now I'm out of the park, and now I'm traversing about the last 30K to Auyuittuq. And Auyuittuq means place of the bull caribou, and it's smaller than Kikatarjuaq. It's got a sketchier runway than Kikatarjuaq, but this is kind of my final approach to town. You can tell because a tourist was cross-country skiing and came up and took this picture and then shared it with me. I did not set up a tripod. And yeah, so here's me doing my last sort of, my last mission. And this is just a cool little drone shot here I'll share of just the sea ice around Auyuittuq, which has caused that crushed sea ice at the edge of shore, which is created by the tides going up and down there. You know, is it over already? Oh no. We need some sound. Should I sing?
Yes.
I'm not going to. Some throat singing would be appropriate. Yeah. Next time. And so here's me kind of walking up into town. This is a old Hudson Bay Company blubber shack. There was whaling operations in the Eastern Arctic for a long time, and this one's kind of been restored to an extent. So my flight got delayed so anyway, so I finished the trip and I lived, and it was incredible. And as I was in Auyuittuq, of course, my flight got delayed. And there's me and that other guy that was in there, and we complained to First Air, and we said, well, why can't you just land? Like, it's not that bad. And they're like, well, you know, we used to push it like that, and last year a plane crashed into the mountain and everyone died. And I'm just like, yeah, well, wait, well, that's cool. You know, because the approach to land, you have to fly over and come in a crazy roundabout way. And so anyways, I got to hang out in town a little, made some friends, and bought some Inuit art. This is a caribou carving, and that is a walrus that's like diving. And this is the community of Auyuittuq. I've stayed in touch with some people from up there, and really awesome place. I mean, you know, you hear these northern communities, they do have their problems, some of them, but there's also these pillars of the community, and there's also that generation is still alive because it was such a short time ago where they literally did live on the land. Like, people that are in their 60s here were born in igloos, you know. So you really get this connection to that sort of way of life that was, you know, not very long ago at all, until, you know, the North got planes and eventually technology kind of caught up to it. People moved into these permanent communities. But even a lot of them, I mean, food is so expensive. A jug of liquid Tide was $50, right? And so you really have to be sustaining off of the ocean, off of the land, like hunting seals and stuff like this, fishing, to more or less be able to sustain up there. And so that culture still exists, and some of the stories that people have when they ran into trouble on the land, or polar bears, or you name it, some of the people, if you ask them, will share some just awesome stories. So that is definitely a big part of it, is going to these communities for me and spending some time. And so it's kind of cool that I got to spend, I think, like 5 days. And the freaking, the hotel is like $350 a night there, right? Because it's the north, right? Everything's expensive. You can't even land a jet. It's way off the road system. I think like one barge a year comes there from Montreal. So I ended up selling my snow trekker tent for cash. Thanks, Dwayne. Where is he? You paid for my hotel for a night, so I appreciate that. Well, anyways, yeah. Oh, right. I'm plugging myself. I always forget that. Everybody, I'm actually planning on coming up with a YouTube series on this trip. So I'm going to edit all this footage into 6 or 7 series, 6 or 7 videos. And my YouTube channel is Jim Baird Adventurer. I've got to remember the Yeah, but there's a lot of Jim Baird adventures on there. So yeah, so here's just a shot of my Explore magazine story afterwards. It was an exciting thing to get that published and sort of write about my whole experience there too. So I got a little publicity over it as well. So yeah, I guess that's about it. Thank you very much. Do we do questions ever here, or is that a thing?
We got time for one.
We got time for one. Okay. You, the only person with their hand up.
Mark?
Yeah.
Well, first, thanks. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I'm curious, why do you use pulse sleds instead of freight tobogans?
Because the Polk Sled Company sponsored me.
Hey, you asked, we find out. Polar Supplies was actually here last November, their Canadian operation, and I phoned them when they didn't say they were coming back, and I'm giving them the like, well, what the heck, man? Like, aren't we good enough for you? He said, I'm in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, I'll let you off the hook on that one. So Don Wright is an artist who lives Sturgeon Falls. I knew where he lived. I just lost it. So. These are originals. This one's on linen, and they're both on canvas, okay? And he has donated these to the symposium. I've never met Don. I know Matt knows him a little bit. So we were really touched when he made these donations. So we'd like to draw for these original pieces of art. So Jim, you're an unimpeachable source here, I'm sure. So if you want to pull 2 tickets.
2 at the same time?
Yes. Well, it's up to you.
Okay.
Here we go. Use your teacher voice. I know you can do it.
7955679.
So 5679, I think were the last 4 digits. We've got a hand up there. And with that, all I have to say is, just bear with me one quick moment. Tickets for the April 4th, 2020 Ontario Backcountry Canoe Symposium are on sale right now. So feel free to go pick some up. Buy early, buy often. Thank you, everybody. We have to be out of the theater for you by 4 o'clock, but you still have time to check in with the vendors on your way out. Please hurry if you have that something special you want to buy. Thanks again, folks. We'll see you next November.